All right. Welcome, everyone who's tuning in. Virtual field days provide us an opportunity to witness specific practices in real time. And today we're fortunate to experience Rye harvest down in Southwest Iowa. And we get to chat with Alan Zelmer about the multiple benefits of rye on his farm. He uses it for spring calving and as a fresh and stored forage for his cattle. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I'm Megan Filbert, and with me is Rebecca Clay from Practical Farmers of Iowa staff. We'd love if you could use the chat function in Facebook to chat your name and your location, so we have an idea of who's tuning in and where you're tuning in from. That'll help give us a little more of a field day feel. I'd also like to thank KWS Cereals for sponsoring this field day. KWS Cereals sees themselves as a partner for farmer success. They concentrate on developing high-performance hybrid rye varieties and high-quality seed. Simultaneously, they focus on consulting and supporting their customers in hybrid rye production and livestock feeding. I'd also like to thank our A-level sponsors, along with our B-level sponsors. We could not put on 60 virtual field day events without our sponsors, so thank you very much. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a community of 4,000 plus members committed to building resilient farms and communities. We achieve our mission through farmer-to-farmer education, including these virtual field days, cost share programs, which Alan is a participant in, and on-farm research. Learn more about us on our website, practicalfarmers.org. So for a bit of housekeeping for this event, it's an hour-long event. It'll go until 11 o'clock. We'd love for you to participate by asking questions through the chat box. We'll stop to take questions at several points throughout the field day, and then we'll have more Q&A time with Alan at the end. We'd also like you to complete a short survey after, and with that feedback, you'll be entered to win a PFI water bottle. We'll share the link in the chat box at the end of the event. So now we'll go live to Alan, who operates an integrated crop livestock farm with his family in Atlantic, Iowa. Alan is joined by his granddaughter, Celia, who graciously volunteered to help Alan with technology. So we're very thankful for her presence. All right, Alan, let's unmute you and take it away.
Okay, Celia and I are having fun at doing this. It seems a little bit odd standing here talking to my granddaughter in a corn bunker. I'd feel a lot better if I was standing out amongst a bunch of people with questions. But we'll do our best in this thing and try to take you forward and try to teach people some of the things that we've learned. We've actively been growing cereal rye now for the better part of 9 years. And every year we seem to learn something. Now I need some help.
Okay, Alan, we're gonna go ahead and show the first video.
Okay.
So you could watch it from your phone at the same time.
Yes.
Laying out here, we're kind of disturbing them. Condition on them, these are mature cows. Condition on the cows, I don't know how we can get them much better. In fact, they're just a little over conditioned for myself. Thank you.
Alan, if you want to say some remarks about that video.
Okay, that is 150 acres that for the past 4 years we've drilled to rye. It's adjacent to 150 acres of pasture that we have. And the thing that I didn't put into play on that is we will allow the rye to get about 6 inches tall. And then we'll start pairing the cows out on the rye. And it's allowed our other pasture a break. They're broke up into paddocks, and they're called sacrifice paddocks. And those cows will just grub that grass to nothing, even though we're supplementally feeding them while they're calving. by going out on the ryegrass, it has made those pastures useful then the rest of the summer, because we can allow the grass to grow and be ready for cows to come back off of the rye. And then a lot of times what we do when we don't need the extra pasture is we'll put where the rye crop is, the soybeans, sometime in June. Cows come off in a lot better condition. This year on that pasture, potentially the plan is we're going to run the cows all year on it. So we've been out and clipped part of that pasture. I think the next video will allude to that, to try to keep the rye from heading out and keep it actively growing.
And we'll play the second video now.
Okay.
So we have moved to another area in the pasture. This is to show you, all we did was run a water line on top of the ground over to a water tank, and the cows are able to drink out of the water tank from all four corners of this pasture. Obviously it's been muddy around here. We've had a lot of rain and they've tracked it up, but the rye is pretty resilient. I doubt it comes back around the tank, but it will creep back in as the weather allows it. The paddocks to the north here, we mowed those last Saturday. They were starting to head out. It was getting away from us, so we just brought a bush hog out, low RPM mowed it, took the tops off of them, and now we're ready to, here within the week or so, we'll turn back out on that if the cows can stay ahead of this. And if you'll, Celia, if you'll pan down here at the rye, some of this rye is wanting to throw heads, and it's our understanding that if we go and clip the tops off of it, she's going to re-till her, and it'll become usable grazing grass again. Cows are very content. We felt at one time there was too much moisture in the ration. These cows were full on Ryland TMR, and so we brought dry hay out to them, offered it to them. They showed just very little interest at all in it, and so right now in the 150 acres there's approximately 200 pairs, and we have 4 dry hay bales invested in that, and there's virtually half of it left at this point. So I think at this point I don't have any solid numbers yet, but I'll work on the numbers, and I'll have to report back in later as to what the expenses were versus the income off this. And this farm is a 52 CSR farm, $8 corn, had us bring it out of pasture, part of it. There's 300 total acres in the farm, and we are trying to decide if we're going to terrace it up or if we're going to seed it back to grass. So right now $8 beans and $3 corn, we're going to put it back to grass because we can make more money with the cows than we can anything else. Thank you.
Great. We'll go now to Alan, live from his rye bunker, to explain what we're looking at.
Okay, so Celia and I are standing in a rye bunker of last year's rye. We didn't have to use it all this year, so we chose to pile the new crop of rye on the other side of this wall. But I just want to show you how good quality stuff. It stores really well. In our industry, we overfeed protein because we use a lot of distillers products or products out of the ethanol plants. So what I need is scratch factor. And 2 years ago, you couldn't buy a bale of hay if you needed to because nobody was making any hay. They were just in corn and soybean production. And I hauled hay upwards of 250 miles to get enough in here because we'll use about 60 to 70 big bales a week that we have to grind. And the rye has allowed us to stretch that either in our feedlot ration or in the cow ration. And the thing that we've discovered with the ryegrass in a cow ration, it is a low cost field stretcher, I call it. It'll make, we can take those pastures if we have to, if it gets dry in the summertime, and we'll actually utilize this for feed throughout the summer if need be with a TMR mixer. So we can walk around over to the other side here now, and I'll show you the new rye being put up in the next pile. It will be next year's feed. We really have a lot of wind again. Absolutely nothing like it was yesterday. But this is our new pile of ryelage that we're putting up. We've got to be getting close to 1,800 tons of rye in the pile. We try to put up around 3,000 tons of it. And we like it actually when we carry some over, because then we know we're not right to the wire as far as having feed for the cattle. We're using a tractor obviously to push the air out, get a good pack on it. We don't cover our piles with plastic or anything. If we do a good enough job of putting it in the bunker, it packs in good enough. And if you can pan over to the silage pile that's over there, you can see a little bit of a rind on the top, and that's all the spoilage that we're ending up with. Gage, my son, started this pile of ryelage right here, and Dwayne is actually running the packer tractor right now. We're getting more rye than what they'd anticipated, so they're going to extend out the pile and make it bigger.
Alan, we have a question on what % moisture is that rye?
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
What % moisture?
The rye, we let the rye head out, and we'll come in about 60% moisture. Obviously, we haven't tested this pile yet, but essentially what we discovered with the rye is we let it head out, and we do that for two reasons. Because when it matures and heads out, then we don't have to spray it with anything to kill it. Once the mower goes through, it terminates it. So for the row crop side, that's a real plus because we're not fighting with it. Now I lost my position as to where I was, or lost my thoughts here, but again, I guess we let it head out, and that terminates it when we mow it. And actually gives us the highest tonnage. That was the other thing I was thinking of, yield per acre.
Do the folks tuning in have any questions for Alan about his ryelage?
Well, if not, should we progress to the field where they're actually actively harvesting?
That sounds excellent.
Okay. We are going to get in a pickup and drive out there. It'll take just a little bit to get there.
And Alan, while you're in the pickup, we will show the video of ryelage harvest from a couple days ago.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Alan, the video is playing.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you'd be willing to answer a few questions while you're in the truck.
Oh, absolutely. It's way easier in the truck. The wind is
perfect.
Really blowing. So yes.
Okay, Logan asks, how do you price the rye in the bunker?
I do it on a cost basis. Every ounce of the rye is chopped and it goes over a scale. And then I price every operation out like I was hiring somebody custom to do it. Typically that cost will run between, depending on our yields and our tons per acre, but it will run between $35 a ton, as high as $65 a ton if we don't get a good yield.
We have another question, Alan. Are you planting soybeans after you harvest the rye?
Yes. Yes. And typically, I call them rye beans. Typically, they will out yield my earlier conventional beans, which is totally against what my farmer had said, but I've got the paperwork that backs it up on the yield. Okay, we are in the field.
Excellent. And this video has about 30 seconds left.
I'm just going to pull down to where they're harvesting, Megan.
Great. Alan, can you talk about the yield difference that you have seen?
Yes, yes. Tell me when you're ready.
Go for it.
Okay. So when we first started this process, we didn't know anything about it other than, oh, I gotta get out of the way here. We're gonna get chopped. Our standard procedure when we first started this was to drill a bushel to the acre, basically mid 50 pounds per acre. We harvested it. We didn't fertilize it. We didn't do anything. We were just doing cover crop is what we were doing. And I have chopped corn silage for years, and I would put in alfalfa behind it in the fall, clear seed it, and got along really well with it. And so I had experience with that. And then when we started doing the cereal rye, we did the bushel to the acre, like I said, and because that's what they told us to do. And we were harvesting it, and we were not fertilizing, and the typical yields at that point were from 2 ton to the acre to 4 ton to the acre, and which we thought was very acceptable. And then started thinking back, I'd actually raised some wheat at one time too, and talking to some people about it. So we started putting nitrogen on, and we didn't know what to do, and everybody was telling us different numbers. So we put on 80 pounds to the acre on a 17-acre piece, and it immediately went flat on us, the first major windstorm that we had, and it got some height to it, and that made it a real challenge to harvest. So long story short, throughout the years, what we've figured out is 50 pounds to the acre of nitrogen spread early spring seems to be the correct time to do it. We quit using a spinner spreader, and we started using a boom spreader that spreads it out evenly across the field, because we could see the patterns in the field, and the yield was showing it in the windrows as we watched it. And then we made a mistake one year, and I didn't get the drill set correctly, and my son took off drilling, and we got basically half of what we wanted on. So I reset the drill, and again, long story short, we ended up with 90 pounds to the acre drilled. And so anymore, our standard rule is if we're going to harvest it for tonnage, we want 90 pounds to the acre. We want 50 pounds of nitrogen on per acre early spring. And if we're just going to graze it, we go back to the 50 pounds of 56 pounds of rye drilled. And we still fertilize that just because it enhances the tillering and the tonnage that we can get per acre off of it.
Alan, we have a question. What nitrogen form is the 50 units in?
We just use the cheapest form that we can find. I have actually pulled anhydrous on it, anhydrous ammonia in the fall. We had a fall that gave me a little extra time, so I pulled anhydrous on it, was really concerned about my stand. That was the cheapest way to do it, and it didn't seem to bother the ryegrass, even though I was tearing some of it up with the knives. but typically what we're using right now is just a dry urea, non-coated, non-preservative, just trying to catch it right ahead of a rain or actually a snow event is fantastic. If I can get that nitrogen spread, that urea spread, and then get a snow on top of it, I'm just tickled to death with it. Do we want to pan the harvest here before the windrower gets done in front of us?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. We'll get out of the pickup and see how the wind treats us here. So we were going with a hydro swing windrower. We just couldn't keep up. The most expensive piece of equipment we have running out here is the chopper on a per hour basis. So we went to a self-propelled windrower with a merger. So if your tonnage is down, as it has been on a couple of our farms this year, there's a belt that drops down underneath. You make one pass through with the windrower and drop it on the ground. And then the next pass, you come back and the merger puts it right on top of the other windrower, the windrow. And that way the chopper is always full and busy. This rye right here is so heavy. I'm estimating it's going to be around 12 ton to the acre is what it looks to me like. So we're not merging it because our chopper was actually having trouble last night when we were harvesting it. Celia, if you would just turn around and pan. Here comes a chopper. I'm sorry. Slow, honey. There's the process. We use whatever we have available to haul with. This is a dump truck that we stockpile manure with. We'll haul gravel when we need it here at the feedlot or the farm, or haul dirt. We have 2 spreader trucks that we haul manure with, both out to the field and to stockpile throughout the summer. And then in the winter, we have 2 tractor-drawn spreaders plus 2 truck spreaders, and we can haul an average of about 100 ton an hour, which is really important when you're dealing with the amount of manure that we are. And the manure is an asset. This farm that we're on right now, we will clean out our sediment basins, so it gets a lot of manure on it, and it is a mid-60 CSR farm. And our yields on this farm, this is a century farm, soon to be is it a heritage farm? It'll be in the family 150 years. And my grandpa would be awful proud as to how this thing is yielding, both in grains and in ryegrass.
Alan, Stacy asks, is 12 a high ton per acre yield, or what's your average yield?
Our average is 8.8, and I believe that average was accumulated over 7 years. And yes, 12 is a high average. I think the highest that we've ever gotten off of a farm was 14 ton to the acre. And that is really the key. This cereal rye to me is another crop, and I treat it like that. And so obviously, just like a corn yield or a soybean yield, if we can gather those more tons per acre, then our cost per acre and cost per hour of all this equipment running goes down dramatically. We currently this year we have 2 farms that are done with the harvest. One was not fertilized. It was just a neighbor called me and said, I don't know what to do with this. And so I explained to him what to do with it. And we harvested for him. We chopped it. It averaged 4.4 ton to the acre. There was no nitrogen applied. Surprising to me, it was all seeded with an airplane. We've, over the past years, have tried to airplane seed and just not been that successful with it. But this year, we're going to try some more because of the winter conference at the Practical Farmers and me being able to visit with some people. We're going to let the shucks of the corn turn brown, and we're going to fire up an airplane, and we're going to run it on all of our farms will receive cover crop. So we're going to use the airplane because we have trouble getting over it all with a drill. that's probably more of an answer than she wanted.
Another question for you. Can you bale this as dry hay, and have you ever tried?
Yes. Last year, again, I had a phone call from a friend of mine that had seeded a bunch of it down, and he was in a panic. And I love this story. I'm always full of stories here, but it was about 40 minutes south of me, hauling time, and he was all in a panic about it because we got wet last spring and we couldn't move. Everybody was sitting still. And I said, so are your neighbors' crops planted? Because we farmers tend to compare ourselves against our neighbors a lot. And he said, no, they're not. And I said, and what does your field look like? And he said, well, it's all nice and green. It's all covered with rye. But my neighbors' fields are all wet and there's a bunch of weeds growing. I said, okay, so that's a plus. And what is your panic? He said, well, I really don't know what I'm going to do with it. And I said, well, I tell you what, we'll send a windrower down to help you, and I'll send a baler down. And it takes a lot of people. That's the hard part of this thing is it takes a lot of people to get the job done quickly. But we went in, joined the race, I'll call it, and we windrowed it. We baled it. Lay time in the field depends on your humidity in the air as far as your dry time on your crop. But within 3 days, we had harvested 300 acres of rye, and it yielded 4 bales to the acre. And those bales, I think, averaged about 1,600 pounds when we ran them across our scale. And he put his beans in, and I'll be honest with you, I was back down there a month or so later just to kind of check it out for him. And I tell you what, his soybean crop looked as good, if not better, than the neighbors, because the other thing that the rye crop did is it actually worked as a pre-herbicide, holding back all the weeds that were actually trying to come in it.
Thanks for sharing that story, Alan.
Yes, more questions?
Yeah. How does ryelage compare to corn silage nutritionally, like as a
you need a nutritionist. If I don't know the answer, I won't tell you. And I obviously the grain is not in it. I, from a layman's terms, compare it to grass hay. That's because of all of the, here in Iowa, the ethanol products that are available to us. We overfeed protein here in our feed yard. So I have a term that I use, whatever they don't need goes out the pooper. So we try not to feed them any more than we need to. But our rye in the bunker is considered like a hay crop. So I had expressed earlier that I couldn't buy a bale of hay 2 years ago. And when you have thousands of head of cattle on feed and you can't buy hay and you need it, that is a gut-wrenching feeling. But that rye bailed us out of trouble because that year in the bunker cost on the rye was $65 a ton to the feedlot. And the hay I was buying was $250 a ton, and it sure was not worth $250. But because of the market and availability, the rye really bailed us out. So I consider it money in the bank when I can put it in a bunker and store it, because as I showed you earlier, it stays in the bunker, the condition stays good, and it's there when I need it.
Wow, that is a huge difference, Alan.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about how you're utilizing the ryelage in your TMR?
As far as, well, in our TMR, what I do or what I use, I have an on-site nutritionist that mixes up a TMR ration. So we'll take all of the products we have available, and it's an Iowa State spreadsheet that he uses, and these are the costs of them. And then from a nutritional standpoint, he will balance my ration for me. Least cost is how we use it. On the cow side, it is cowman's dream to have a bunker full of ryelage, as long as you have the equipment to use it, to utilize it and feed it. Because when the pastures get short in August, if they do, I have feed for those cows, and I can actually take it out, and we'll just, if we have to, we'll take the feed truck out and we'll actually just drop it on top of the ground and let the cows clean it up to supplement the pastures. Because otherwise, we all know cows, they'll start stretching on the fence, and the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence to a cow.
So Alan, can you tell, do cattle have a preference between, TMR or their corn silage and ryelage?
Ask me the question one more time, I'm sorry.
Do cattle have a preference between ryelage or corn silage? Or is it all mixed together?
No, I can't really, because when you feed cows, whether it's a feed truck or a tractor or a skid loader, when they hear that noise, they come running. It's like, here comes the cookies,
Yeah.
So no, I can't tell you that there's a difference between corn silage and ryelage. I can tell you from a cost factor that the ryelage, as long as I can get the yield out of it, is by far cheaper to raise, because I end up with, long story short, over the past 7 years, I just keep compiling this data. Every acre of soybeans that are raised after rye, it's $138 an acre to my benefit if I raised rye on it. And that is an average throughout the last 7 years. And $138 in today's environment is a make or break situation.
Right. Alan, can you talk a bit about how you decide which rye fields to graze versus which to harvest? Are you already pre-planning that at rye planting?
Yes, some of our farms we own, those farms are fenced and ready for cows. Some of the farms, we've put up hot wire fence around them. Some of them are too close. Excuse me. Some of them are too close to the highway and they don't have good fence, so I won't put cows on them. All of our farms, as long as time allows it, are seeded down to rye, whether they're going to go to corn or beans. I have not been super successful coming behind ryegrass with corn. A year ago, we were very successful with it, but that has been the first time. And we actually came in, we seeded, it was 129 acres. We chopped 12 tons of rye off of that field. It is a 75 CSR second bottom type farm. I hired a neighbor. He came in with a disc chisel and an anhydrous application right on the chisel. He chased the chopper basically out of the field, chiseled it. As soon as he was done, we went in quick and worked it down and then planted it to corn. We went in there with 200 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. And the thought with my sons here, discussion I had with them was, if it doesn't make it, and this again, I better give you the date. It was the 10th of June when we did this. If we don't get anything else, we'll chop it for corn silage. If we need wet corn, we'll harvest it for wet corn. And then the final thought was, if it makes it full term, we will go ahead and harvest it and bend the corn. We ended up taking it for wet corn because we needed it for a bunker. So the yield on that farm was 225 bushels to the acre. Our other farms, our total farm average, the 225 was involved in it, but our total farm average last year was 260. We had a very good corn year, but that's the only time that I've been successful with corn behind ryelage. But I guess the one thing that you have to remember, we get so focused on raising corn and beans. I had 3 options there. I could chop it, I could raise it for wet corn, or I could take it to the end and raise it for grain. And we need to have those options here in agriculture, because as we've seen this year, things change so fast. And when I made that commitment on the 10th of June, I can't change it if I'm just a corn and bean farmer. But with the livestock involved in it, I have different options that I can go with what the crop that I'm raising.
That's exactly what I was thinking before you said it, Alan, is you're explaining all of the benefits of being an integrated livestock and crop farmer
Yes.
because of the flexibility that is afforded to you.
Yes. Yes. I am a, I want to say this. I started farming on my own. My family had farmed for a while, and then they got out of production agriculture. So I always tell everybody I don't have any old money. So we've had to, my wife and I have 6 kids, 4 daughters, 2 sons. My family's the most important thing on this earth to me. And if they want to be involved in agriculture and production agriculture, I've tried my darndest to figure out a way. And trust me, they've worked harder than a lot of their urban friends. But there is absolutely nothing that makes my heart any warmer in the morning when we all join for a cup of coffee and decide what needs to be done for the day or the week. And they bring a couple of my grandsons along because we'll jump in the pickup and away we go. And granddaughters as well. I mean, I'm not prejudiced. I have 19 grandkids and 10 boys and 9 girls now. So the girls are kind of evening up right now. And Celia is my oldest granddaughter. So, excuse me.
Alan, I have a couple questions for you about the actual like timing of rye harvest.
Yes.
It's my understanding that this is a little late this year. Can you talk about when you normally harvest rye, ryelage, and what happened this year?
I'm about 6 days late from where we would typically like to be. We like to be that last week of May. And I'm probably going to get some rocks thrown at me here on this deal, but everybody wants to push us forward and forward and forward on planting our crop. And you got to do this early. And you're not a good farmer if you don't get this done by this date. Well, I don't necessarily go with that. I mean, I keep that on one side, but on the other side, I was 7 days behind a lot of the planters that started out here. In fact, I went and did a little bit of tillage on some farms that we had to do because our ground was not warm enough for that corn to be planted. And I can take you to some bean fields that didn't make it because they were planted so early and they froze. And now they're back out replanting the beans in our area. And I'm not faulting anybody's ways. Everybody does things the way they want to. But I tend to watch the season, and that's when I plant. I expressed it was the 10th of June last year when we planted that field of corn. I think we're focused too much on being early and fast and maybe a little bit more on what the environment's telling us to do, because when you start fighting against Mother Nature, I can guarantee you who's going to win. So I'm not late at all. We plant a lot of our rye beans that first week of June. And I'll take you back to that pasture farm. I don't remember now if I told you guys this story, but that pasture where those cows are grazing, we harvested the corn in the fall. We planted it to rye. This would have been 3 years ago. We went out and planted that field. We got the cows off of it. It was muddy, wet, and I thought, my gosh, boys, we aren't going to raise anything on this farm. Chased those cows off of that rye field. I took off and planted it with the rye not being sprayed. And it was rye. Cows are lazy, so next to the water, the rye was about 6 to 8 inches tall, actively growing. To the north end of that farm was headed out because the cows are too lazy to go down there and eat it. And I was planting with a tractor that when I got out of the tractor, the rye was above my armpits, and planted it to soybeans. That would have been the first week of June. We sprayed it, but obviously the headed out rye had killed itself. It had terminated itself. And then we turned off dry that year in late July. In fact, the daughter holding the camera, the granddaughter here holding the camera, I was up watching her show her sheep at the Dallas County Fair. And the corn, when we left our home place that morning, was white in color, trying to protect itself from all the heat that we had blowing. We stopped over at that rye field, and the beans were coming up through the rye, and the rye was decimating itself because we just left it sit the way it was. We didn't roll it. We didn't do anything to it. And later that evening, when we came back from the fair, I walked out because there's some sand spots on that farm, and the beans were still alive, which totally amazed me. So fast forward throughout the year, I watched those beans outgrow the trash and stuff that was around them. The erosion factor virtually went to zero, and that farm has some high D slopes on it. There's 100 acres right across the road from it that had no rye. The beans were planted conventional. They were planted early or mid-April, and we were able to harvest those, and we came through on harvest. And the further east we went in our county, the lower the yields got, and it struggled to stay in the 50s. We were 53 bushels to the acre. We got over to that farm. We couldn't harvest it because the beans were still green, lush. So we went back to harvesting corn, and then we went back over to it about a week later. The 100 acres that did not have rye on it, there's a road that separates them, virtually been treated the same for the last 7 years as far as manure application and fertility. Both comparable low 50 CSR farms, 53 bushels to the acre, and those rye beans we harvested 72.8 bushels to the acre off of. Now, had I not seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed this. But we turned around and did the exact same thing the next year and saw the same results. Our rye beans by far out yielded our conventional beans. But the thing that happened out there as I watched that whole thing and thought about it is those rye plants protected that hot, dry July wind. Those soybeans actually fed off of the moisture that was left from the straw that was there, which totally opposite of what you think as a conventional farmer, or I would think. It sucked all the moisture out. Well, that's not the case. It really doesn't. It'll protect and hold that moisture there, and then as it dissipates, it actually fed that crop and kept it going. I might be getting a little long-winded here, but that was one of the most exciting things that I've ever seen with this cover crop program. And besides, the fact is the erosion factor.
Right.
Which we have that that I showed you earlier.
Alan, I think now would be a really good time for us to show that last video.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and do that, and
Okay.
then bring it back up for questions.
Okay. Get them to come here, can you?
Alan, can you explain what we're seeing in that video?
This is, and I definitely am not picking on neighbors, but this is just a difference. We had a really hard rain come through here. We were dry for quite some time, and then we got an 1.5 inch rain in like, I don't even remember, it was 20, 30 minutes, so it came way too fast. And so what you're looking at there, or what you guys just saw, was a neighbor's field that's adjacent to mine. And I noticed last night when we were out here chopping, I noticed the ditching that went on in his farm. And then if you paid attention there in the pan, then all of a sudden you look out across all this green, and just the thought that went through my mind was, man, I sure am glad that mine looks like this and not that. And it's not that I don't have fields that's happened in. I'm not saying that at all, but look at the difference of what the rye did for the farm. It holds my nutrients where I put them, and it's enhanced my yields. And we got into a little bit of a discussion about this. I'll get on my podium here one more time, but there's a bunch of roots underneath us that are doing work for us that I didn't have to put any diesel fuel in the tank or do anything. The roots take care of it. They'll break up a lot of the compaction that you see out here. And that was contrary to what I thought when I originally started in this process.
Alan, we're going to play that video. It's only 40 seconds, just one more time so people can get a look now that you've described it.
Okay. And then I want you to
Okay, Alan, we have about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
And we'd like to solicit some more questions in the chat box, but also any, last views of Ryelage harvest.
Yes. My crew is pretty bashful and they're all out working. We were trying to get them to come up so we can introduce them, but it may or may not work. One of the driving points that I can tell you here in our operation is these are the guys that make it all work. And some of them are full-time, some of them are retired guys. There's a huge asset out there of retired guys that have a lot of knowledge. And I'm 60 years old, but at this age, I still harvest a lot of information from the older fellas. They help you make those decisions. So this is a pan of Celia's taking pictures as they're chopping. Trying to think if there's anything else that I can tell you guys.
When will you plant soybeans?
As soon as we're done with this, that's where I'm headed.
Okay, so tomorrow.
Right behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll end up with some traffic areas that the beans will struggle to come up in. We seem to be blessed with rain showers after we plant our beans. They'll fill in, they'll bush out. Maybe they're going to assemble for us here. Yep, they're coming in.
We have one more question while they come in, Alan.
Yes.
If you had any soybeans already planted, did rye help protect small emerge on those first cold nights we had?
Yes, I forgot all about that. Actually, if there's time, I'll take you up here. We tried a new experiment this year. I went out very early and planted soybeans. Very early, planted soybeans into the rye to experiment with if the beans would come up and if we could cut the rye over top of the beans. And we did about 20 acres that way. And I'll have to give you a play-by-play, but what it looks like right now is it's actually going to be successful because the beans are growing underneath. And if we're successful with that, next year, that's how I'll do a lot of this that we're harvesting. I'll have the beans planted underneath it. We'll take the rye away because going back and looking at what happened here, the beans actually elongated, struggling for light. The rye outgrew them, kind of suppressed the growth. We set the header so that we were cutting about 6 inches off the ground, and I think they're going to make it. They tell me up north they will roll the beans to increase the yield and make the beans bush. So I guess we're rolling over it with loaded trucks and choppers, and we'll be able to track the yield because we have precision equipment on our combine and our planters, so we'll know where the beans that I'll plant today are and where the beans that I planted early are. So again, it's something else that we're learning. Everybody's kind of begrudgingly making their way up here.
Thanks for that answer.
Yes. Is there any more questions?
We do have a question. At what trifoliate on beans?
I'm sorry, you cut out on me there.
At what trifoliate on beans?
Actually, there was 3. And the goal of the thing was to leave at least 2 on the plant when we cut.
Great. Is the crew ready to be on camera?
They're slowly, begrudgingly gathering. I hire my chopper because I don't have enough acres to justify ownership, and they're all assembling. And I guess the main driving point on this crew is the people that actually do the work. And it's not that I don't work, because I do, but it just takes a lot of people. And look at the age variation in our crew. And of course, one of the youngest one is the 2 youngest ones are the slowest ones coming in. They were giving me a bad time about doing this, so I told them I was going to make them be on the camera. Yep. Got one more to come in.
Okay.
And I'll show you my crew. All right, so you guys turn around, smile pretty. I had to do this all day, so it's your guys' turn. So you guys quit moving around, I can introduce you. Kyle Wilmuth, hold your hand up. Dwayne Dreger, Fred Flutie, John Swalke, Scott Steffens, Ron Riedemann. Let's see, his name is, Gage Zelmer, and Ethan Zelmer. That's our crew. So I guess we thank everybody for watching, and I'm assuming we're out of time.
We have 8 minutes left.
Oh my gosh, 8 minutes left. Well, you guys get back to work. Does anybody have anything they want to add in this deal? No? No. They all want to go back to work. Said the rye is really good. I'm going to take you up here and show you these soybeans that are growing in the rye that we cut. The size of these windrows are great. The old saying, it warms my heart when I see it. It's just like ears of corn. So I planted these beans, I believe it was April 7th in this rye, and the rye was approximately 4 to 5 inches tall. I had expressed earlier that the soybeans, some of the soybeans, the early planted ones around this area, were nipped and had to be replanted. And I really think what happened was the rye protected the soybeans from the cold weather. You can see how the elongated the stems are. Cotyledons are still attached. We'll know shortly if this is going to survive or not. And if it does, one of my biggest questions that I have here is, number one, will this take care of the compaction problems that we have, the drive tracks where we haul silage out of here? And number two, I can go out and plant these in a more timely fashion, and it just evens out my workload a lot.
Alan, we have a question that was directed towards the crew, but hopefully you can answer it.
Okay.
Sarah's wondering what your crew has noticed during rye harvest compared to corn silage harvest. Any differences?
Try that again.
What has your crew noticed with rye harvest compared to corn silage harvest?
What have they noticed? Well, I can tell you, if you have hay fever like I do, the ryegrass drives it crazy. And that's just a side note. I don't really think there's a lot of difference. Corn silage, We're in the low 20 tons per acre that we're hauling off of here. So obviously it's slower. We're harvesting 16 foot at a time, which actually we're doing the same with corn. So I really don't know that there's a lot of difference. It's all virtually the same equipment, other than we just have a hay pickup head on the chopper versus the quick cut header on the combine or on the chopper.
Thanks, Ellen.
You bet. You bet. Any more questions?
I'm curious what what perceptions do your neighbors have? Have you had
Sure. Go ahead.
Have you had any conversations with your neighbors? Positive, negative? Are some of your neighbors catching on and also planting rye?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem. So my neighbors are watching over the fence, I call it. They've been watching us do this for quite some time. I've fielded more phone calls from neighbors asking questions about it. I still don't see a lot of people doing it, which I don't understand, because a lot of them could utilize the roughage. And the other side of it too is, Thea and I were talking about this earlier today, even if you don't need the hay or the roughage, there is no reason at all that you can't do this, because number one, your soil health and filth is improved from it. You can harvest the hay off the top. It's another revenue generating tool that you can use for your farms. Because even today, there's not a tremendous amount of hay made around this area. And I feel a lot of phone calls from different guys because I'll get calls that I have hay available, and I'll also have people call and say, hey, I'm out of hay. Do you know anybody that's got any extra?
Hey, Alan, can you try readjusting the mic? It's a little choppy.
Okay. We're out in the wind here. Let me walk. Celia, let's walk back to pickup. This might be better here if we can get back to the pickup.
So, Alan, yeah,
Yes.
can you
Is this better?
Can you recap what you were just saying in the field, the benefits, soil health benefits, etc.?
The soil health benefit on rye, absolutely number one thing when you start into this process, you have to be patient. It's not instantaneous. It takes time. And I tell people at the very minimum, give it 3 years, because there's things going on out here that even lifetime farmer, this is my 43rd crop that I've planted, that we learn. And the root action underneath, what it's doing for our soil, obviously we don't see it, but in time you will. We used to run around with a 4-wheel drive tractor and a inline ripper to break up compaction, and we do whole farms. On occasion, we still will, but for the most part, that tool's sitting up in a machine shed, and we haven't been hooked onto it now for 2 years because we haven't seen the need to run it. So obviously something's going on underneath, because a lot of this equipment, when I get my grain cart, which is a track cart, but when I get that hooked to my tractor and it goes across my scale up here, it weighs 127,000 pounds. And it runs all over these fields, so obviously there's got to be some damage that we're doing with it. The rye, in my opinion, the root mass underneath is doing a lot of that work for me, and I don't have to, like I said earlier, dump diesel fuel in something and take off. Earthworms. I mean, there's all kinds of soil activity that starts happening down there once you start doing this. But it takes time. And back to the early planted talk that I had, you got to let the rye grow and get some height to it, because the roots are doing the same thing underneath. So you got to give it time to work. So the early planted thing, if early planting is your thing, and you got to beat all the neighbors done, you're not going to allow the rye to have enough time to give you the full benefit of it. Is that?
Oh. Yes, thank you, Alan. And with that, it is just past 11 o'clock, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time to explain and show us your farm. I want to thank Celia for being your right-hand woman and filming you this whole time. And I want to thank your crew for the incredible work they're doing.
Absolutely.
And of course, thanks for everyone tuning in today. We had between 30 and 40 viewers. And I'm going to share my screen here. And this is just a reminder to fill out the eval. The link is in the chat box. We really value your feedback. We read each and every one of them. And again, thanks so much for tuning in. With that, we'll sign off. Thanks, Alan.